647. That's how many Linux distributions exist right now. Most built by one or two people working nights and weekends asking nothing in return. Every single one could be gone by January 1st, 2027. Not hacked, not abandoned. Legislated out of existence by a California law that never once mentions Linux and doesn't need to. It already pulls every operating system into its net. The law is called Assembly Bill 1043. Some distros are already banning users by geography just to survive it. Here's everything you need to know. To understand why this law hits open source so differently than it hits Microsoft or Apple, you need to understand what Linux actually is, not technically, but structurally. Linux isn't a product. It's a philosophy with a kernel attached. When Linus Torvalds released the first version of the Linux kernel in 1991, he wasn't launching a company. He posted it to a news group and said, essentially, here's the thing I made, do whatever you want with it. That ethos became the DNA of everything built on top of it. The GPL license that governs the Linux kernel is legally designed to keep software free to use, free to modify, free to distribute. No gatekeeping, no toll booth, no terms of service requiring you to hand over your birthday. For 30+ years, that worked beautifully. Developers around the world forked code, built their own distributions, and released them under the same open terms. You got Debian, a community-run project with no corporate parent. You got Arch Linux, a distro famously built on the principle that the user is in total control. You got Tails, which exists specifically to leave no trace of who you are or what you did on a machine. Each of these projects made a deliberate choice to know as little about their users as possible. That wasn't an oversight. That was the entire design. Now, California is essentially asking them to reverse that design. And the clock is already running. AB 1043 was authored as part of a broader wave of child safety legislation that gained serious traction after the Senate hearings in 2023, where CEOs from Meta, TikTok, Snap, and others sat in front of Congress and got grilled about what their platforms were doing to teenagers. Those hearings were brutal, and they created enormous political pressure to do something, anything, that looked like meaningful action. States moved faster than the federal government. California moved first and moved hard. The bill targets what it defines as operating system providers. It requires them to build a native age estimation interface, something that collects a user's age or birth date at setup and stores it in a way that apps can query. When an application launches, the OS is supposed to tell that app whether the user is a minor. The intention is clean parental control enforcement baked into the operating system layer rather than left to individual apps to implement inconsistently. On paper, for a company like Apple or Google, this is annoying but survivable. Apple already knows who you are. Your Apple ID has your birth date. iOS can route that signal to apps without breaking a sweat. Google's Android ecosystem is messier, but Google has hundreds of engineers and a legal department that speaks fluent compliance. They will build it, they will ship it, and they will move on. For a two-person Debian derivative maintained out of a home office in France, this is a completely different conversation. And that gap between what a corporation can absorb and what a volunteer project can survive is exactly where this law becomes something much darker than its authors intended. So let's talk about what compliance actually requires, because this is where the story stops being abstract and starts getting ugly. To satisfy AB 1043, a Linux distribution would need to build an age verification mechanism into the OS setup process. That means a user interface that collects age data. It means a secure local storage mechanism for that data. It means a system-level API that applications can query without getting direct access to the raw data. It means testing that mechanism across hundreds of different hardware configurations because Linux runs on everything from Raspberry Pis to decade-old ThinkPads. It means maintaining that mechanism as the law evolves, because laws always evolve. And it means being legally accountable if something goes wrong, if the data leaks, if the API gets exploited, if a minor slips through because of a bug in the verification flow. That is not a weekend project. That is months of engineering work, legal review, security auditing, and ongoing maintenance. For Canonical, the company behind Ubuntu, that's a realistic ask. They have the people and the money. For the person maintaining Linux Mint in their spare time, or the team behind MX Linux running on community donations, that ask is not realistic. It's a death sentence disguised as a compliance requirement. And here's the part nobody is talking about. The law does not include a carve-out for open source projects. It does not distinguish between a trillion-dollar technology company and a volunteer-run foundation. If your software meets the definition of an operating system provider and it is available to users in California, you are subject to the same requirements as Apple. Full stop. When the Register broke this story in early 2026, the response was immediate. Forums lit up, mailing lists flooded. Developers who had spent years quietly building their distros suddenly found themselves Googling California compliance law at midnight. What came next was stunning. Midnight BSD added a license clause banning California residents from using their software for desktop purposes, effective January 1st, 2027. A free, open-source operating system, banning users by geography, not out of principle but out of survival. Projects like Adenix went further, drafting preemptive bans covering any state that follows California's lead. The logic is brutally simple. If you can't comply and can't afford to fight, you exit. That's the villain in the story. Not bad faith legislators, the villain is a compliance burden designed for trillion-dollar companies and applied uniformly to people who built free software in their spare time. It's a wall, and only the wealthy can climb it. And the victim? It's not just the developers scrambling to figure out their legal exposure, it's you. It's anyone who uses Linux specifically because it doesn't surveil them. It's journalists running tails to protect their sources. It's security researchers running Kubes OS because it was built from the ground up to compartmentalize sensitive work. It's everyday users in states across America who switched to Linux precisely because they were tired of operating systems that treated them as data points. All of those people depend on a healthy, diverse Linux ecosystem. And that ecosystem is now under pressure it has never faced before. Now here's where the twist comes in, and I want you to hold both sides of this because the nuance actually matters. A B1043 is not a law written by people who hate open source. The legislators behind it are responding to a real crisis. Children are being exposed to harmful content earlier than ever. Platforms have had years to self-regulate and have failed repeatedly. Parents feel helpless. And from a policy standpoint, building age verification into the operating system layer is not a crazy idea in the abstract. If the OS knows a user is 13, every app on that device can enforce appropriate restrictions without relying on each developer to implement their own imperfect solution. That argument has genuine merit, and some people in the Linux world are actually trying to engage with it rather than just fighting it. Canonical's engineers began exploring a technical proposal involving a D-bus interface, essentially a privacy-preserving signal layer where the OS could communicate an age band to applications without ever storing the user's actual birth date. The idea is elegant. You don't store sensitive data. You don't create a honeypot for hackers. You just expose a signal, minor or not minor, that apps can read without knowing anything else about the user. If this becomes a ratified standard, Ubuntu and other Canonical-backed distributions can ship it cleanly, satisfy the law, and protect user privacy reasonably well in the process. That sounds like a solution. And in a world where only Ubuntu existed, it would be. But Ubuntu is not the Linux ecosystem. It is one node in a network of hundreds. And a standard that Canonical can implement does not automatically become something that every downstream distro can adopt without significant engineering work. The distros that survive this are the ones with resources. The ones that don't are the ones that made Linux beautiful in the first place. The weird, niche, specialized distributions built for specific communities, specific hardware, specific values. Think about what a hollowed-out Linux ecosystem actually looks like in practice. You end up with 5 or 6 corporate-backed distributions that can afford compliance and a long tail of dead or legally exiled projects. The rich get richer. The volunteers get legislated out of existence. That is not a hypothetical trajectory. Several projects are already on that path right now. And here is why the timeline matters more than most people realize. January 1st, 2027 is not far away. That is one product cycle for most distributions. That is 1 year for volunteer developers to either build a compliance infrastructure from scratch or make the decision to walk away from something they have spent years building. Some of them will choose to walk away quietly without any announcement, without any fanfare. A project will just stop getting updates, and most users will never know why. Meanwhile, other states are watching California. Utah, Texas, and Arkansas have all advanced child safety legislation that touches device-level enforcement in various forms. The precedent California sets will inform what those states do next. This is not a contained fire. It is a fire with wind behind it. So what do? Because I am not leaving you with just a sense of dread. That is not the point of this video. The first thing you should do is get educated on the specifics. The Electronic Frontier Foundation has been tracking AB 1043 and similar legislation across all 50 states. Their legal analysis is rigorous, accessible, and free. Read it, share it. Knowing the actual text of the law is the difference between an informed argument and an angry comment that nobody takes seriously. The second thing is to contact your state representative directly, not a form letter. A real, specific message explaining what this law means for volunteer-run open-source software. Most legislators drafting child safety bills are not thinking about a solo developer in Germany maintaining a Linux distro used by 50,000 people. You can make them think about that. A clear, calm, technically literate letter from a constituent carries more weight than most people assume. The third thing is to financially support the distributions you care about. Debian has a donation page. Linux Mint has a donation page. The FreeBSD Foundation accepts contributions. Small projects with financial runway are significantly harder to kill than projects running on empty. If you use it, fund it. Even $20 once a year adds up when thousands of people do it. The fourth thing is to watch the canonical D-Bus proposal closely. If it matures into a clean, privacy-respecting standard that the broader Linux community can adopt without centralizing personal data, it could become the technical path that saves many smaller distros from having to build compliance systems from scratch. Engage with that work. If you are a developer, contribute to the discussion. If you are a user, amplify it. The fifth thing is to make noise in the right places. Write about this on your blog. Post about it in the subreddits and forums where Linux users gather. Bring it up in your tech Discord servers. The biggest advantage AB 1043 currently has is obscurity. Most people in the Linux community still do not know this law exists. Every person who learns about it and starts paying attention is one more voice that policymakers eventually have to contend with. Here's the thought I want to leave you with. The history of technology is full of moments where something irreplaceable disappeared quietly. Nobody announced the death of the open web. Nobody sent out a press release the day personal computing stopped being personal. These things happen through accumulation. 100 small decisions, each defensible on its own terms that together add up to a world that looks nothing like the one we meant to build. California Assembly. Bill 1043 might be one of those moments. A law designed to protect children that ends up becoming the mechanism by which the most open, most free, most surveillance-resistant computing environment ever built gets slowly pruned down to a handful of corporate-approved options. Or it might be the moment the open source community finally looked up from the terminal, engaged with the policy process, and found a smarter path forward. The difference between those two outcomes is not written yet. It depends on whether enough people decide this is worth their attention before January 1st, 2027 arrives and the options narrow. If this video made you think about something you had not considered before, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this reach people who need to see it. Drop a comment telling me which distro you run and whether you think it could realistically survive an AB 1043 compliance requirement. I am genuinely curious what this community thinks. And if you want consistent coverage of the laws and policies quietly reshaping the technology we all depend on, subscribe. There is a lot more of this coming, and you're going to want to know about it before it is too late to do anything.